we've seen that simple demo of working with a basic little data set there. But what would happen if my data got more complex? That maybe I've got certain actions that I need to be able to perform on that data, and I want to abstract that away and put that into really kind of a layer of its own. Does Angular give me that capability?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's many situations where you might want your data to be between multiple different components. So you can't really put the variables in one component, and then how do you get it from the other component, right? So in this case, Angular has given us providers. Providers can be either services that we can create, or also they can be libraries, right? So the one we'll look at first is the service providers. And so I have here on the slide an example of a pretty simple service provider, and this particular purpose is to hold data for us. So, and this data can be given to multiple components at the same time. So if one component reaches out to modify this data, all the components that are touching this data or retrieving this data would show the updates. So what we have here is a task service. We've called it task service, could be anything. We set a variable called tasks and gave it three strings in an array. And we have added 2 functions. So this entire service provider, we can what we call inject into components through what we call a dependency injection. And we'll see that later in the example. But what I want everybody to understand here is that service providers are really built for you to retrieve data, send data, API calls, those kind of things. Also, just even manipulate data. And it's really your center point where you have all the data being retrieved from, no matter how many components you want to use the data with. It all is going to point to one service provider.
Yeah, and one real quick little thing, just because I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with the terminology. You mentioned dependency injection.
Right.
Yeah, for those of you that are not familiar with dependency injection, it's a wonderful little technology that what you wind up doing in your code is you just simply say, hey, I'm expecting something to exist. So if I've got a collection of tasks that are being exposed through service, then all that I do is I simply say, hey, I'm going to be looking for a task service. And so Angular will then give me that task service. I don't have to worry about going off and creating it and getting it on my own. It's going to be passed in to me. And this gives you the ability then to swap that service out. So maybe I'm going to be using a different back-end data store. Maybe I'm going to be using something like WebSockets to update things dynamically. Or maybe I want to do testing where obviously I'm going to be using some form of a local data store. I can do that over here without having to update my code. So that's what that dependency injection will give me, is that all I simply say is, hey, I need this service, and then at runtime, it's automatically going to be created and handed to me based on my configuration. There's nothing I have to do in my code to update that then.
Exactly. And I think it'll make a lot more sense when you see it in action. You see it kind of connected together. So awesome. Cool. So let's do that. Let's show an example.
Okay, I dig it.